Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the opening of the 2022 activities of the Chair of Irish Studies, William Butler Yeats. It is really a great pleasure to welcome the authorities here, present here, and all the audience. I know that the majority of our audience is online, so welcome. I would like to introduce you to Your Excellency, the Ambassador Seán Hoy, in the middle of the table here with us, the head of the Department of Modern Languages, representing also the Dean of the Faculty of Philosophy, Letters and Human Sciences, Professor Adrian van Gool. And finally, and not least, all the contrary, the President of the International and National Cooperation Office, Professor Sergio Percival Baroncini Proenza. So welcome for honoring us with your presence in this opening. And I would like to thank especially our guest speakers, Professor Munira Mutran, from the University of São Paulo, Professor Eunan O'Halpin from Trinity College Dublin, and the Irish historian Eve Morrison, who they came straight from Ireland to be here in person. And this is our first hybrid program of the chair, and we are all learning together how to do this. So I would like especially this year to welcome all our students. I think that after 2 years away from campus, is really a great pleasure to see some of the students this first week around the corridors, some of you here in the room, and of course next week we hope all of us coming back to the campus in security, following all the protocols. And besides, because this year we are witnessing a terrible war which makes us rethink human values and concepts of intolerance, racism, and difference versus, for example, solidarity and love of humanity. So I think we can reflect this all together when we come back on the campus, and also think about this, even witnessing at home all these news. Another thing is that, of course, in this world of contradictions, the chair is going to remember two important events in Ireland, being celebrated in Ireland. That is the 100 years of the publication of Ulysses by James Joyce. That's to say, it's a literature celebration. And the celebration of the centenary of the Irish independence. So I think, again, it will give us a lot of context to think about the losses of lives in war, in revolutions, for good, ideals, but then at the same time, the great results that we are living now today. Okay, so in order not to continue speaking, I will pass over to Your Excellency, the Ambassador Seán Hoy, to give you his words.
Bom dia a todos e a todas. I don't know if this is easier. But thank you very much, Laura. And let me just start by saying that when I come here, it is like coming home. Unfortunately, for the last 2 years, we have not been able to meet in person. But I was here in 2019 for my first St. Patrick's Day in Brazil. And we were here with the Speaker of the House from Ireland, Seán O'Farrell, or Ceann Comhairle. And I recall at that time that he made a presentation about what Ireland was like in 1919. And now we're in 2022, and as you mentioned, an important year in Ireland as well. But let me just make a comment or two about the COVID and the coronavirus, because I think as we are coming to a new start, I think a lot of us, and certainly myself, because I stayed here for 6 months when my wife went back to Ireland. I stayed for 6 months on my own. And I think for a lot of people, we started to think about things that we didn't even know were in our heads. We started to remember people from long ago, and, that was a very rich experience. Sometimes surprising, sometimes traumatic, but it was rich. But I think for most of us, we started to think, what are our priorities? What are the important things? What are we going to do when this virus is over? And, even for our own department, about setting our values. And one of the outcomes of that is that we have published our first ever strategy for the Latin America and the Caribbean. So, we've realized that the world is interconnected. What happens in one country affects another. And when you have a global pandemic, it's what happens in Brazil impacts in Ireland. And, I'm proud that we were able to make a contribution on 2 occasions to Brazil. We made a donation of medical supplies, and we also supported the Cruz Vermelho when the health system collapsed in Manaus. We were able to make a donation within a week. So, those are important things about the values. But then, the coronavirus also presented opportunities for people to do things that they never prioritized before. And some of them decided to read great books. And it was the second time that I read Ulysses. I had read it first when we were expecting our youngest to be born, and we had to stay for 2 weeks in South Africa at the time. And I thought, well, if I have to be there for 2 weeks, this is it. I will get a copy of Ulysses and read it. And I did. And when she was 21, I gave her that copy with all my handwritten notes and lots of question marks. But lots of people used that period of the pandemic to read great books, others to watch lots of series on Netflix, and then people like myself to do both. But just if we think about Ireland 100 years ago, and when I came here, there was a proposal, not very well defined, that we should celebrate 100 years of Irish independence and combine that with the bicentenary of Brazil, your independence from Portugal. But then we realized that our independence had a soft edge because we went into a civil war. We didn't have a definite date. We didn't have a defined narrative, and it has not proved possible to combine the two. But we will have other initiatives, and we have one with the National Library in Rio, recording the history of the Irish in Brazil, and Owen will talk more to that, I think, when he has the opportunity. But you will recognize that today I'm wearing blue and yellow, not green. And as you said, Laura, we have a war in Europe. We never believed that we would live in this sophisticated era when we thought our values and our principles were so developed that this could happen, and the land war and the atrocities that we're experiencing. But, everything has changed in the last 4 weeks. People who were living safely in their homes now are refugees. And we have, welcomed, I think the last figure was at least 5,500 people to Ireland. We are anticipating many more. And we've had a huge response of people registering to allow people to stay in their homes. And I think it's part of the coping mechanism from the pandemic that is making us more open, and we realize how vulnerable we are as individuals, and that we should reach out and support others. But also, I think I have spoken at 4 or 5 other events over the last 3 weeks regarding Ulysses. And one thing I have thought a bit was that the book was published in 1922, but a book about 1904. And the world had completely changed from 1904 to 1922, and Ireland had completely changed, unrecognisable, and yet Joyce somehow was able to to remain stuck in the moment, stuck in a single day in 1904. Now, not every writer has to be a journalist, and not every writer has to write about the environment they live in, but it's particularly unique, I think, to live through all that chaos, to have moved to neutral Switzerland to survive, and to continue to write about something that was in 1904 before all this chaos. And when we go to the next session, Munira, that's something that we might probe a little bit more on, because I always think of Edna O'Brien, who wrote one of the best books on Ulysses and who received her Distinguished President's Award the same time as Munira. But she stayed with me twice in Nigeria when she was writing her book about about Boko Haram and the kidnapping of the young girls. And her most passionate message anytime she engaged with people is writing has to be true. And Ulysses has lots of true writing that nobody ever put to paper before. And yesterday in Rio, somebody quoted to me, half quoted to me, but said there was a recent article in the New Yorker by a woman writer who said the best piece of feminist writing is still the last chapter of Ulysses. And as a woman, I hate to say this, but nobody has ever written anything more powerful and more prominent. And I'm putting this up, maybe this will stimulate some further discussion. I think it certainly stimulates some questions and answers. But, Ulysses is true to the hidden thought. But the immediate environment, the chaos, the war, it's not there. And that's something that, I'm just thinking a bit more about, because Yeats talked about the chaos in Ireland. He wrote those magnificent poems that we all know and we all studied in school. But then Samuel Beckett was a member of the French resistance, and he never wrote about that. He didn't even speak about it, but he was actively engaged in that conflict. So these are things I'm thinking about that I wouldn't have thought about probably if we didn't have a war in Ukraine and we didn't have a pandemic that has made us think about different things and reset our own priorities. So let me just finish with one or two comments. What we're doing this year, because we're also a partner with your university, is we had an idea that we call it Ulysses sem pelos olhos brasileiros, Ulysses that wandered through the eyes of Brazilians. And, when I came here, I heard there were 14 cities that celebrated Bloomsday. So I thought, why don't we have 18? And why don't we do something that can reflect each chapter of the book in 18 different parts of this huge country? And what we've done is we've allocated a chapter to different universities and asked the students, the literature students and professors, to speak to their students about it with the objective of this being articulated into a mural. Because graphic art and street art is very important in Brazil, and it's very, very, very well defined and world famous. But if we could get young people to listen to one chapter of this book, and every single chapter is a different book anyway, and put this into art, then we will have something completely new, unique, something that will reflect Brazil, but will have its platform in Ulysses. And I'm just very excited about it. It's taking more time, but this is process. What we would like to do at the end is record how the winning artist, what they heard, what they processed, what they produced. And that's more important than the piece of art. But we'd like to record this in a book. If we get 18 pieces of consistently good murals, we will be able to do a publication on this. And that's my hope. But it's about the process, and it's an opportunity to profile all the different universities, because there will be 18 chapters, and each will have profile your own Joyce story, I think, your own Ulysses story. And then, as I see my two good friends here, wonderful artists on the other story of Roger Casement, I can maybe close by saying that, you know, Roger Casement's great niece, Susie Casement, lives with us in Brasilia. She met her husband in Oxford when they were studying, and that their daughter is going to plant a tree tomorrow in our residence, because what we try to do every year on St. Patrick's Day, well, this will be the third year, is we get somebody that has Brazilian and Irish blood to plant a tree in our residence, because we own it, and that these are people that will always come back to Brazil, and in future, I want them to go to the residence and say, where is the tree I planted? And now, what am I doing 20 years later, and did I ever dream I would be doing this? Okay, thank you very much. Obrigado.
Bom dia a todos. Dá para ouvir? Está se ouvindo? Tudo bem? Obrigado. Bom, senhor embaixador, senhor colega presidente da UCANI, senhor cônsul, bem-vindos a todos os presentes em nome da Faculdade de Filosofia, Letras e Ciências Humanas e do Departamento de Letras Modernas. É um prazer muito grande porque eu tenho certeza de que este é o primeiro evento que realizamos no nosso curso de letras, no nosso prédio de letras, neste momento de retorno presencial, né? É um momento que estamos preparando com muito afinco e que esta semana se expressa fundamentalmente em encontros com alunos, em digamos, atividades que fazem os próprios estudantes com alguns professores para conhecer o prédio, para ir conhecendo o curso, e que, a partir das próximas semanas, com muito esforço, porque, enfim, significou adaptar muitos espaços, esperamos realizar plenamente, né? Também é muito importante, penso, nem preciso dizer, pela relevância que tem este ano para a Irlanda. O embaixador dizia que nunca é muito certo, muito definido quais são as datas, né? Bom, aqui no Brasil também, em 2022, celebramos 200 anos de independência, que eu poderia dizer também, como brasileiro naturalizado que sou, que não é algo tão claro quando começa e quais são os momentos e graus da nossa independência, não apenas aqui, também na América Latina toda, né? Eu sou binacional, sou argentino também, todos temos datas. Porém, esse trabalho, digamos, a independência é uma luta que parece não terminar em momento nenhum. Não quero roubar mais tempo, quero fazer votos de um belo encontro para vocês e me unir aos votos que foram feitos aqui, tanto pela professora Laura Izarra como pelo senhor embaixador, pela paz no mundo, contra as agressões, contra os crimes de guerra, contra toda forma de colonialismo. É isso. Obrigado.
Mr. Shanghoi, Ambassador, Mr. Seán Beniz, Consul General, Professor Adrian, Head of the Department of Modern Languages and Literature, Professor Laura, Coordinator of this chair. So it's my pleasure to be here. It's a great honor. And firstly, I would like to thank Laura for making me aware of this chair. She kindly visited me 2 days ago. I'm saying that because I have just took place in my office, and as an engineer, I'm not so related to social humanities and sciences, and so, but I'm trying to realize the importance, and I'm convinced about the importance of this chair and the cooperation that we have done in the last years. So I apologize with you because I'm reading what I'm thinking to say, because I don't want to lose any word that for me is important. Just a few words, but I was consulting the records of the chairs and the website, and it's really very impressive to see the numerous high-quality events and activities that were done in the last years, and intensely developed. I could note, and including events of different natures, conferences, courses, in short, about the Irish art and culture, and also involving mobility of students and researchers, joint publications. Is very impressive. It's perfect for us. Actually, our main goal is to provide this kind of cooperation, really hard. And undoubtedly, this chair of Irish Studies has played a very important role in internationalization and academic exchanges relations between Irish universities and USP. And since its foundation in 2009. So I'm proud to see that. I'm very glad, therefore, to be here and to represent in our university in this section. Therefore, I would like to congratulate everyone involved in this chair and say that USP and us, in particular in our international office, are completely committed for continuing the cooperation, to support the cooperation. And thank you. This is only that I was planning to say. And most of all, I congratulate you for this very important activity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here, opening and saying all these words, so important for all of us. And then, of course, we haven't mentioned, we are in a green room celebrating St. Patrick's tomorrow. So I think it hasn't been more appropriate to come to this room for the event. Thank you very much, and we will move forward with Ambassador Seán Hoy and Professor Munira Mutran, who will start her lecture. Thank you for being here, Professor Sergio. Thank you very much, Adrián, too, and you are very much welcome. As the ambassador says, this is his home. It is your home, too, okay? I want to also thank Sergio here present, another Sergio from the International Relations Office. He is the one responsible for exchange for all the agreements. So it's very important for you to be here. Thank you.
Follow your example, because it's impossible to speak for 40 minutes or 30 minutes with a mask. Well, first,
I think introducing Professor Munira Mutran in her own house.
it's not necessary.
Well, let me just read this for the record, but I think sometimes it's a bit like introducing you to your own cat, you know, saying, please, you have to get off the chair, my chair. But anyway, Munira is Associate Professor of Literature in English at the University of Sao Paulo. She specializes in Irish literature and comparative studies. She holds an MA and a PhD and a postdoctoral thesis at the University of Sao Paulo and a degree of Doctorate of Literature, honoris causa, at the University of Ireland, Maynooth. She is co-editor of the Brazilian Journal of Irish Studies, 1996 to 2018, and of lectures, a series of books with lectures given by W.B. Yeats, Chair of Irish Studies at USP. She has published articles and chapters in books on Irish fiction and drama, two collections of Irish stories translated into Portuguese, Joyce no Brasil, Seán O'Phelan's Letters to Brazil, Album de Retratos, and A Batalha das Estéticas in 2005. In 2018, she received the Presidential Distinguished Service Award from the President of Ireland. Okay, thank you. You recognize yourself.
I do, and I get tired just thinking. You know, Seán, I have been for such a long time at USP that I have a small metal number as if I were a piece of furniture. 27917. So welcome everybody to this opening of the activities of the chair. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm glad you're here with me. Unfortunately, I have to explain that Professor Declan Kiberd, who taught at USP in 1992, was not able to come, to be here, right, today. And so, as a poor substitute for the brilliant specialist on Ulysses, I'll do my best. I begin by reminding you that in Ulysses, each episode can be interpreted through many points of view, since each has a definite personality and style. In order to justify one of my approaches to the Cyclops episode, let us examine the epigraph used by Otto Rank for his book, The Myth of the Birth of the Hero. PowerPoint. Can you, Seán? Okay. In this epigraph, Goethe says something very interesting about tradition. He asks, what am I myself? What have I done? All that I have seen, heard, noted, I have collected and used. My works are reverenced by 1,000 different individuals. Often I have reaped the harvest that others have sown. My work is that of a collective being, and it bears Goethe's name. That quotation is significant because it is there that Goethe is announcing a very strong tendency of modernism, which we are celebrating this year. That of using one or more or many sources to create a new work. Wilde, Eliot, Yeats, and Joyce, just to mention a few in the English language, practiced and discussed critically the process of rewriting tradition. Joyce, for example, borrowed and incorporated, to use Goethe's phrase, what others have sown, but he also renewed and transformed his cultural and literary heritage. Number 3, please. Yes. Look at Odysseus in the Circe episode. Can you see? Yes. Trying to save his men who had been changed into animals by the witch. The great hero looks daring, courageous, handsome, and very strong. It is not surprising, then, that the organ for this episode is, do you remember, muscle. And look at Bloom, right? As conceived by Richard Hamilton in his book, Imaging Ulysses. It is interesting to mention the artist's explanation of his portrait of Bloom. He says, the pages of Ulysses can be combed through without finding an account of Bloom's appearance, yet we have an acutely real perception of him. Portrayals of him, whether in artists' illustrations or casting on the stage, in film, I always remember, what's his name? Yes, O'Shea. And I always think of Bloom as O'Shea. And film and TV all reveal the same archetype. Number 4, please. Now here, this is a visual representation of the Greek hero as Bloom. You have this kind of mask, right? And I'm not wearing one. As Bloom showing, as the Greek hero's Bloom, showing the process of transformation. And now, very, very briefly, the story, because I need it to make parallels. In the Greek epic, Odysseus and his men arrive at the land of the one-eyed giants. They rest and eat at Polyphemus's cave. When the giant arrives, he devours 2 of them raw. So you can imagine how the men were frightened. Number 6. Look at the giant. He looks violent, terrifying, this one-eyed giant. In the Odyssey, each character has an adjective describing him. So Odysseus, besides many others, he's prudent. And so prudent Odysseus knows better than attack him then. But as a very clever hero, you remember he devised the horse in the Troy War. But he devises a plan for the next evening. What's his plan? When the giant arrives, he's very gentle, offers him a lot of wine, and when he's drunk and asleep, he blinds him with a burning stick. The giant cries for help, says that no man is harming him. So the other giants ignore his plight. In the morning, when the sheep, every morning he lets the sheep out to graze. And when the sheep are let out of the cave, next one, you can see the giant and his, as he's blind now, he's touching the sheep, and he doesn't realize that the Greeks hide among them and run away. Imprudently, this time, Odysseus challenges the giant from the shore. He's far. But, furious, the monster throws an immense rock towards them, almost sinking the ships, but misses the target. He's blind. Now, I have to tell you, I told you these details because Joyce borrowed, among many, many other details from the Odyssey, he borrowed and used them, but in a parodic way. The burning stick, which blinds the giant, is the cigar smoked by Bloom when arguing with the citizen. The no man reference is represented by the omission of names. The man, the furious man, doesn't have any name. He's a citizen. And, of course, the anonymous narrators. The immense rock thrown at the Greeks is a tin biscuit, which is in the bar, with which has Queen Victoria's effigies stamped on it, and which is thrown in the direction of Bloom by the furious citizen. Those parallels, out of a great number, illustrate the way Joyce rewrote the Odyssey. I want you to think of Ulysses as a very funny book. Don't take it seriously, gravely, all right? He rewrote the Odyssey in a satirical vein. It's 5:00 p.m. Bloom, a common middle-aged Irish Jew, enters the Barney Kiernan's pub to meet Martin Cunningham, and you know he's very generous. They want to discuss Patrick's, who has been buried in the Hades episode, Patrick's insurance policy, because they are afraid that the widow and the children may lose it. Presiding the conversation, we see the citizen and his ferocious dog. His physical description is very, very funny. Well, we don't have time, but I'll just mention one example. His physical description illustrates the technique of gigantism chosen by Joyce for this chapter. Number 7, please. Now here we see David Norris's from Trinity College. You may know him. He wrote about Joyce's work in cartoons. It's a wonderful book. And notice the 3 figures as imagined by David Norris and Carl Flynn. The citizen, the dog. Is it better now? Okay. The citizen, the dog, and the anonymous narrator. Notice that the narrator is one-eyed too, as all the men in the pub, except Bloom. They are all dying for a drink. As we don't have time to read the long description, I'll just mention, and this is a quotation, the citizens' nostrils were of such capaciousness that within their cavernous obscurity a field lark, a bird, might easily have lodged a nest. So this is gigantism. And what about his heart? I'm not talking because Joyce speaks about everything, but his heart, how did it sound, this gigantic man? The reverberations of his formidable heart thundered, causing the ground to vibrate and tremble. So, end of quote. So you see, exaggeration is one of the characteristics of the satirical attitude towards the citizen. Joyce was lucky to inherit a very rich Gaelic and Swiftian satire. As a matter of fact, in one of his critical essays, Joyce emphasized his admiration for the author of Gulliver's Travels, affirming that, I quote, Swift shares with Rabelais the place of the best satire in the world literature. Vivian Mercier acknowledges this in his invaluable book, The Irish Comic Tradition, in which he suggests that Joyce shows the art of satire in his lampoons, famous lampoons, The Holy Office and Gas from a Burner, adding that the young Joyce is the Dean reincarnate. Can you imagine? By the time he was writing Finnegan's Wake, Mercier says, Swift had become his alter ego. All right, besides exaggeration, another satirical device is parody, extensively used in the Cyclops episode, to describe and ridicule the notion that Ireland, I'm sorry, Seán, that's Joyce, not me.
And he's always right.
To describe and ridicule the notion that Ireland is beautiful beyond all expectations and that it is bountiful beyond measure, lists in the Homeric manner and also medieval manner. Irish literature, Irish medieval literature has all those lists, right? But these lists are comically used. Thus, an example, I quote, in the fair land, a land of holy Micken, that's a saint, and the pub is near St. Micken's church. That's true. So you have a long list, lists of trees. Any tree you can imagine is listed. Trees, fish, where this beautiful scene is described, delightful. And I mention just a short passage to give you an idea of the parody. I quote, in the mild breezes, notice that the weather is always wonderful in Ireland. In the mild breezes, lovely maidens sit in close proximity to the roots of lovely trees, singing lovely songs. And then a long, very long list of Irish heroes, I quote, who sleep in that fair and saintly land. Colin, Brian of Kincora, Wolfe Tone, Parnell, etc., 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 but the list continues. For the humorous effect, Captain Boycott, Dante Alighieri, Charlemagne, the last of the Mohicans, Dark Rosalind, Baylor of the Evil Eye, Thomas Cook and Son, The Woman Who Didn't, and so on and on and on. It's very, very funny. The fair land produces floats of spinach, pineapple chunks, strikes of tomatoes, drums of figs. Are there figs in Ireland?
Not from Ireland.
Drums of figs, trays of onions, pearls of the earth, punnets of mushrooms, and apples. Red, green, yellow, brown, sweet, big, bitter, ripe, pomelated apples. And what to say of the herds? And what to say of Irish pottery, wool, textiles, Limerick lace, Connemara marble, and also the treasures of ancient Ireland? I mention just a few, so that you, when you go back to Ulysses, to those lists, will be able to see how funny they are, the parodic effect. To be aware of the parodic function. And here, in this passage, the idea is to ridicule a very sentimental idealization of the Emerald Island, as guidebooks do. Joyce parodies with gusto the legal, epic, scientific, and above all, the journalistic style of various kinds. This is important for our episode, for our panel. The biscuit tin with Queen Victoria, which I have mentioned, is a source of satire of the British nationalism, because now I have to explain that Joyce, we are going to talk a little bit about 5 minutes. British nationalism. Victoria, her name, Her Most Excellent Majesty of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and of the British dominions beyond the sea, Queen, Defender of Faith, Empress of India, the well-beloved. They loved her from the rising of the sun to the going down thereof. So, and also he mentions the Congo, he mentions the Belgians, he mentions Roger Casement, and all the violence in this, which narrow nationalism leads to extreme violence. So, as the man in the pub, when talking, and this is the next one, talking about Digman's recent death, there's a very strange scene of a séance. Of course, this is an obvious reference to Yeats and Madame Blavatsky, who used to have seances. So I just want to mention the end, because the spirits are fluttering, and there's ruby light, and so on. So it's a very surrealistic scene. And it ends with the words which are strange, talafana, lavatar, etc. You can see them. Since theosophists had predilection for words that sounded and were spelt as in Sanskrit, these strange words, and of course I had to go to the notes to understand them, are merely telephone, elevator, hot and cold, and water closet. Enough of parody, and as I don't have time to go on with nationalism, I would like to mention what Seán said about the actuality of Joyce today when we see the war in Europe. And so Joyce is very careful to show, I'm not going to say anything about Irish nationalism, criticized by him, but it is so up to date. Everything he says about crime, punishment, flogging, killing, emboweling people, it's horrifying. And it is what we're living now. So I'll just finish with what Bloom, yes, the next one. Bloom, yes. With Bloom argues with the citizen. Bloom, who has been very pacific all through Ulysses, now he reacts, he attacks, and he tells the citizen, it's no use, force, hatred, history, all that. That's not life for men and women. Insult and hatred. And everybody knows that it is the very opposite of that is really life. And then Alf asks, what? Love, says Bloom. I mean, the opposite of hatred. How these words tell us what's happening nowadays. We are celebrating 100 years of Ulysses, which has become a classic in the 20th century. It is a classic. And it is important to highlight its literary value, but also its universal appeal in 1992 or in 2022. Thank you. No, 30 minutes.
Well, thank you. I mean, all I can say is it was too short. I certainly could have listened for another hour. And I particularly welcomed the way that you tried to visualize the book, because, you know, this is what we're anticipating with our project with the public art, with the murals, is just how capture that, how this is relevant 100 years later in a different culture, in a different part of the world. And I agree with you. I met Milo O'Shea only once, but we were on the same plane to New York, and he said hello to everybody that was sitting around him.
How nice.
And he had those very, very striking brown eyes and that face that was a comical face. It was Leopold Bloom coming to sit beside us on the aeroplane and smiling and shaking hands with everybody that sat around him. So,
You'll never get rid of Bloom.
no. And I don't know. I've never been on any other plane where anybody did that. So, but just thank you very much. We're not having questions and answers at this stage, Laura. No.
From the YouTube, we are just waiting for them, but I think
No.
No.
There is any question here to be done. But what it is interesting, I think, Munira, what you said is this idea that the war, and the ambassador also mentioned in the opening, that the war is not there. He is portraying 1904, but there are all these moments, as you mentioned at the very end of your
The
talk.
Congo, yes, I was going to mention.
Yes, so it is impressive to see how he transversally he is in a way referring to all the horror of the First World War and what was going to come afterwards.
Well, thank you very much. And maybe to finish, Barney Kiernan's pub has been empty, I think, since the 60s. And I read recently that that area is up for development in Dublin.
Yes.
And they're looking for some investors to buy it and to renovate it and to make it the ultimate place that every Joyce scholar must go and visit. So there are so many of them, but I think this would be the right pub. We all know of Mulligan's on Poolbeg Street from the shorts from Dubliners, and Davy Burns, of course. But I think if Barney Kiernan's pub was reopened, it would be a place of fun. And maybe we will all go there someday in the future. Thank you once again. Thank you.
One question from Gisele Volkov. She is attending us through YouTube, and as many of our colleagues following you, Munira. She says, does Professor Mutran recommend we start reading Ulysses from the very first chapter, or is there any other recommendation? As it is for beginners.
As someone who has taught Ulysses many times here at USP, I always recommend that everybody begins with Dubliners. Because Joyce is wonderful in Dubliners. I'll just give an example. Clay, my favorite story in Dubliners, tells the story of the protagonist only in one day. He's experimenting, you see, for Ulysses. Then I would strongly recommend the portrait, because Joyce there is using he's making a synthesis of realism, naturalism, symbolism, myth, dream, and so on, which he's going to use in Ulysses. So, and then, Gisele, I always begin with the Hades episode, because the 3 first chapters should be studied with the portrait. Stephen Dedalus goes to Europe at the end of the portrait, and he comes back to Ireland because his mother is dead and died. And so there's a lot of continuity. And these 3 episodes, I think, are difficult for a beginner. So I would go to Hades, and which is maybe one of the best of the book and easier to understand. And all the parody and satire and black humor, which is in Cyclops, is present there. I hope I have answered your question, Gisele.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you all. Thank you.